Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Keighley Poltergeist. If you've not listened to the previous 3 episodes, then why not? Since the last episode, I've had an amazing response. Gwen's story has been picked up in the local press, online, and on social media. It made front page news in one local paper. I've had various invites to give talks online and in person, the details of which I'll share as soon as I can. I was also invited to attend a paranormal investigation in Keighley, which I did on Saturday night. More about that at the end. In this episode, I'm going to go into more detail about Gwen's life and her family before sharing some stories from her descendants. I've had direct contact via email and WhatsApp with 4 of her grandchildren, and indirect contact with 2 others. It's been really nice sharing the podcast with them, and now getting to add their family stories to it. They had some really interesting things to tell me. First, a quick recap for everybody. Gwendolyn Morley's father, Solomon, died when she was just 11, and she was haunted by visions of him. She was scared of her largely absent father, in life and in death. At the age of 19, following a relationship breakdown, she started to experience strange phenomena: unexplained noises, objects moving, and things disappearing. Gwen was a working class woman at a time of industrial and financial strife in the UK. She lived in Keighley, West Yorkshire, in rented accommodation with her mother and disabled sister. Things were hard. The phenomena cost her at least one job and was causing problems with another mill. Machinery was inexplicably malfunctioning around her. She was initially sent to work in the mill kitchens, but the problems continued. At home, she was close to being evicted due to the damage being caused around her. As a desperate last resort, she was taken to the British College of Psychic Science in London, where she was helped and the phenomena subsided, but it didn't entirely stop. On returning home to Keighley, there were more incidents, although we don't know the details of those. So, that's where we're up to in the narrative of the story. I'm now going to give some more details of Gwen's life. She's a central character of this story, but before now she had been forgotten, anonymised out of history. Whilst this is a story with a paranormal angle, I'm passionate about telling the stories of ordinary, working class people who aren't normally the focus for historians. When speaking with journalist Emma Clayton about the story, she said, "Gwen's no longer an anonymous mill girl." Gwen was born on the 28th of September 1905 in Shalden, a small coastal village in Devon, just north of Torquay. Her mother, Edith Hollins Poor, was from Eccles in Salford near Manchester, and her father, Solomon Morley, was from Selby in East Yorkshire. I don't know why Gwen was born so far south in Devon. I assume something to do with her father's work in travel and tourism. Her older brother John was born in Cambridge while Solomon was studying there, and Gwen's older sister Mary was born in Eccles. They were a family who moved around quite a lot, it seems always trying to keep up with Solomon. By 1911, the family were no longer living together. Edith and the children were living with her mother in Keighley. We know that Solomon was off around Europe as a tour guide for Thomas Cook around this time. He returned to Keighley in 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War, but he died just a few years later. In 1921, aged 15, Gwen was already working as a doffer in a woolen mill. Her job was to replace bobbins on the spinning frames as they got full. She worked at Dalton Mills, Keighley, which has in recent years been used as a filming location for period pieces such as Peaky Blinders and Downton Abbey. It was once the biggest textile mill in Yorkshire. We know that in 1924 she was working at Grove Mill but left after the strange phenomena started. As someone who's done a lot of family history over the years, I'm fascinated with how stories pass down through generations, how a kernel of truth can be wrapped up in generations of elaborations and confusion to become family myth. And Gwen's family were much the same, even within just 2 generations. One grandchild was only vaguely aware of the story and had it that a famous author had visited Gwen for a weekend, clearly an echo of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's involvement and perhaps James Hewitt Mackenzie's visit. Another knew the Conan Doyle connection, but thought Gwen had gone to stay with him. All were aware, sometimes vaguely, of the stories of Gwen and the strange effect she was having on machines at the mill. A few thought the story was perhaps made up, or certainly over-exaggerated. None knew the true extent of the phenomena, about her stay in London, or the amount of press attention the story received. There was a sense that their parents, Gwen's children, were slightly reluctant to talk about it, as though they were scared of what had happened and perhaps afraid of adding fuel to the fire. I wonder what they'd witnessed themselves growing up. One thing the family were able to confirm was my suspicion about Gwen's father, Solomon Morley. His obituary hinted strongly that he'd gone off the rails at university, and I wondered about a possible problem with drink. Unprompted, I was told that Gwen's father wasted all his time and money on wine, women, and song. I mentioned in the first episode that one of the earliest phenomena Gwen experienced was a photograph of Solomon repeatedly falling off the wall at home, and it's now been confirmed that this is the photograph I described in the last episode. Whether it was as a poltergeist or psychological trauma, I'm certain that Solomon haunted Gwen. Another story the family shared involved one of Gwen's son-in-laws. He was a staunch non-believer, and he would sometimes tease Gwen about the stories of her making things move and breaking mill machinery. She would apparently tolerate so much, but when she'd had enough, she would stare him dead in the eyes and say, "The poltergeist will get you if you don't watch out." Her son-in-law would try to brush it off, but was apparently visibly shaken. Sounds terrifying, like something from a horror film. What I find really interesting and perhaps revealing is that at this stage of her life, Gwen perceived the poltergeist as protective of her, or she used the idea of a poltergeist in that way. Maybe she was just joining in the fun, but it seems markedly different from the young girl afraid of her father's ghost. Maybe, as happens in maturity, and especially when you have your own children, she could reflect on her father and her own childhood through a different lens and maybe realised that he wasn't a monster, but had his own demons to tackle. Whether paranormal or psychological, you can imagine this helping her change her relationship with her father. In terms of further poltergeist activity, there's only one incident that has been shared with me so far. As I said, it feels like there was a reluctance to talk about the full extent of the phenomena within the family, and to generally play it down to the point where some of Gwen's grandchildren thought it was made up. When Gwen died at home in 1967, she was with her daughter and son-in-law. Incredibly, at the moment of death, her bed began to shake, move, and then actually levitate. The movements were witnessed by multiple people, and they carried on for weeks after Gwen had died. I was stunned when I heard this story. I really wasn't expecting anything else. And as ever with this case, I'm afraid I don't really know what to make of it. It's not something I was expecting. I know strange things can happen at the time of death, as the body is going through its final moments. There's a set of symptoms associated with this final phase of life called terminal agitation. It's where a person can get very confused and restless, fidget, and even shake. I can imagine this explaining some of the phenomenon, but it carried on for weeks after Gwen's death, which is obviously very strange. Could it have been purely psychological? A symptom of the trauma the family felt? I'm still speaking with the family and making new contacts with others who knew Gwen, so if anything else comes up, I will of course share. As ever, this is a live research project, and I have managed to get hold of another historical source for the story. A book published in 1951 in New York called Haunted People, The Story of the Poltergeist Down the Centuries, by Hereward Carrington and Nandor Fodor. Great names. They sound like vampires. The book started life as an article in 1935 and was expanded for publication. This is from the introduction. Nothing submitted in this book is believable, yet facts are more stubborn than beliefs, which would have made an excellent tagline for this podcast. The book only contains a very brief paragraph about our story, and I'm only mentioning it as it actually gives Gwen's correct name. Detailed report of violent poltergeist phenomena centering around Miss Gwen Morley, first in Yorkshire and later at the British College, London. Continued for some time under close observation. Unexplained. Damage to furniture and crockery estimated at £45. Girl cured by a medium, Mrs. Barkle. No further trouble after this. There's obviously a few things wrong. She caused much more than £45 worth of damage, and there was further trouble. But it is the only other source that names her correctly. Obviously, Gwen was still alive when this book was published, but I don't think it had much impact in the UK. It's actually pretty hard to get hold of a copy today, so maybe she was totally unaware of its publication. I've really enjoyed researching and telling this story, and I'm now keen to see what others there are out there. I mentioned the archive of the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, in the last episode, and I think it's got huge potential for other cases for me to uncover. With that in mind, I've set up a Facebook page called The Poltergeist Project. This is going to be the umbrella under which, hopefully, I can undertake more historical research around specific poltergeist cases. I've got a shortlist from the archive to start with, and I'm just doing a bit of a literature review of them all to see what's out there already and what I can add to them with my historical skills and experience. I could stay in Yorkshire. There are cases in Bradford and Otley, across the border to Lancashire and my hometown of Blackburn, or head south, with cases in Berkshire, Devon, London, Suffolk, or go north to Argyll or Perthshire in Scotland. Check out the Facebook page for more information. I'll also post some photos there of Gwen and her father and other people involved in this story. There's some things that just don't work in an audio format, so it'll be a nice place for people to go and see those visuals. It's still my intention to view the SPR case notes in Cambridge about Gwen and this story, but at the moment I don't know when I'll be able to do that, so that episode will have to be on the back burner for now. Right at the start, I mentioned that I'd been invited on a paranormal investigation in Keighley. I've never been on a paranormal investigation before, so I was excited and perhaps slightly concerned about doing this. But I do want to say a huge thank you to Chris Whitehouse and the team from Whitehouse Investigations for getting in touch and making the offer. You can find their content on YouTube. So I was very brave, and just a few nights ago, I headed over to Keighley. Through mist, fog, and torrential rain, I drove along South Street, slowing slightly as I passed the site of Prospect Mill. The investigation itself took place in the cellar of a Victorian shopping arcade, one Gwen certainly would have known and visited. I said in episode 1 that I'm a skeptic, but I was curious to get a feel for the kind of spiritual activities Gwen would have experienced with Hewitt Mackenzie and Kathleen Barkle. It was an interesting evening. The team were all really nice and very friendly and reassuring. They answered all my probably silly questions and helped me through the various activities from table tipping to Ouija boards. We got lots of information from the Ouija board about people and places. Unfortunately, nothing that I could corroborate as a historian. I didn't personally experience anything that I thought was paranormal, but I did hear some sounds and definitely saw things move. Others in the group felt touches and the sensation of someone blowing in their face. What I thought was really interesting was seeing people's reactions to relatively small incidents. Whilst we were down there in the dark, I wondered what we would have done had the table risen to the height of ceiling before gently settling back down, or if our teacups had all been thrown against the wall and smashed, with us stood feet away, or maybe our chairs started tipping over all of their own accord. Now, these were just a few of the hundreds of incidents that took place around Gwen. I don't think I'd have stayed in that cellar for very long. So the next episode will actually be the last one for the Keighley Poltergeist story, for a while at least. I'll do an update when I get to the SPR archive in Cambridge and see what light it might shed on the story. For the last episode, I'm going to sum up all my thoughts on this case. Because I've been researching as I've been recording and releasing these episodes, I've not really had an opportunity to analyse everything again and try to come to some conclusions. I'll also answer any questions that you might have, so please do get in touch with me. You can email me at thekeightleypoltergeist@gmail.com. Hopefully by the time I record the next episode in a couple of weeks, I will also have settled on my next investigation, so perhaps I'll be able to share where I will be going next. But for now, thank you, and goodbye.